Hello everyone and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host Matthew Head, and in this episode I'm talking to Kathy Elkind. She's an author and a long-distance walker. Her walks include the GR5, the Andalusia coast to coast in southern Spain, as well as others. This has all come from a gap year where she trekked over 14,000 miles in Europe. Her book, To Walk It Is to See It, takes a look on our past and reflecting on growing up with dyslexia as she sees this through her walk, which she did as an adult gap year. I'll put links to the book and other things we talk about in the show notes will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Good. So, where I thought I'd kick this off with really is that I was having a delve through your LinkedIn profile, and you're trained at one point to be an eating psychology coach. Now, what exactly is that, and what piqued your interest in getting into that kind of thing?
Let's see. An eating psychology, now it's called a mind-body eating coach. But anyways, and this links back to dyslexia. I used food throughout my life to sort of numb and soothe the feelings of shame. And those first feelings of shame came from struggling with learning to read in elementary school. So, but it wasn't, I became an eating psychology coach in my 50s when I, wanted to deal with those issues.
Oh, I see. So, wow. So you actually trained to be the coach rather than going to see the coach was kind of your solution.
Yeah, I did go to a coach also while I was, and I was so impressed with the work that I became an eating psychology coach. No. So it's coaching. It's not therapy, but it's coaching.
Yes, of course. So did you find it help? It's interesting, the comfort eating and then trying to teach yourself how not to do that.
Yes, I did. But I also felt like there was something missing. And I also became a teacher of mindful self-compassion. And before becoming the teacher, I also took the mindful self-compassion class. So what I noticed is when I had to sit down and write, by my 40s and 50s, I could read and I was proficient, but writing still caused me anxiety, basically. I didn't used to use that word, but it was difficult for me. And I would always reach for chocolate or some sort of sweets, cookies, and I would overeat to get me through the writing process. And it just didn't feel right to me. And so what I learned from eating psychology and mindful self-compassion is that I was using the food, again, to numb and soothe instead of learning to just be with those feelings of not feeling good enough and slowly giving myself, basically, you talk yourself into like, ooh, this is hard. Writing is hard for you. And look how far you've come. It's like coaching yourself with words, basically.
Yeah. So let's go back to the kind of what you alluded to might be the spark of all this, which is your dyslexia and how that affected you growing up. So for a bit of context, at what point in your life did you find out you were dyslexic?
Second grade. So I'm in my 60s now. And I grew up outside of Boston and I was in the public school system, and the teacher started, I was in the lowest reading groups, and she told my mother that I was stupid and that, I wasn't learning to read. And my mother, even though she was a young mother, she knew I wasn't stupid. She really knew I wasn't stupid. She knew that, she obviously learned that I was struggling to learn to read. And so she moved me to a private school. And I was lucky and privileged to have a father who made enough money so I could go to private school and get some extra tutoring. And they suggested that I go into Boston. Mass General Hospital was actually testing for dyslexia back then. And I was diagnosed then, and I then had more tutors for doing the Orton-Gillingham system of, hardcore phonics and everything like that. But it still took me a long time to learn to read. So, and I felt the shame started when, as a little girl in second grade, not being able to read is, it's very difficult to hide that. And I would pretend that I could read. And I felt very different from the other kids.
Yes. Yeah. Second grade. So how old did you be? Because
let's see. Second grade is 7 or 8 years old.
Okay. So that's quite early for.
Yeah, it is.
That's so. Yeah. You mentioned York Gillingham, which we'll come back to in a minute. What other kind of interventions did you put in place then once you and your parents knew that dyslexia was one of the reasons you were struggling to read?
Basically, it was just extra tutoring at that point. I don't, again, this would have been in the late 1960s. So they're just, I don't know. I don't remember having anything else besides extra tutoring, reading at, those very phonetic books. And my mother was always good. She always read out loud to me. And she continued to read out loud to me for a long, long time. So, and even back then, there weren't books on tape or anything. I think there were books on tape maybe for the blind. Well, it wasn't even on tape because tapes weren't made, but it was a long time ago. So I didn't have we never tried different colored glasses or anything like that. It was basically just extra tutoring. And I think because it was a small school, the teachers, most of the teachers understood that I had trouble reading. And I did very well in math, except for, of course, the word problems. If somebody read me the word problem, I could do it, but I couldn't read the word problem to be able to do it. But luckily, math, I did well in math.
Yes, yeah. That can work out quite well, can't it? At least that gives you a subject you can feel good about yourself with.
Exactly. And I was good at sports too. So
that always helps.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you did the York Gillingham method. I don't think I've had anybody on before that's done that. Can you describe exactly what it is? It's not something we get so much over here in the UK. So how does that work? You mentioned it's quite hard with the phonics.
What I remember is there's sort of a stack of all the different phonemes. So the letter A can, I think, have maybe 6 or 7 different sounds.
Yeah.
So you learn all the different sounds for that. And you learn that CH is a phoneme because it's 2 letters that make one sound, ch.
Yeah, ch.
And it's basically drill of all of the different phonemes and then putting the phonemes together to make syllables and then syllables to make words. I personally found it's very dry.
Is it? Sounds it.
Yeah. And I hope they teach it better now, and maybe it's even on the computer and stuff like that. So I would hope that they teach it a little bit better because it is pretty dry. But I think it does, all the science, my understanding is all the science nowadays, that's what dyslexics need to help to learn to read. But you do also still need to keep ahead with your work, with audiobooks and things like that. And all the different options.
Okay. Now, what did you do after school then? Because we know what you did at 50, which has changed a bit. But there's a bit of time happened between then and...
Yeah. I've done a lot of different things. I get bored. That's the other thing. I get bored easily.
Okay.
I actually sort of ran away from the pressures of the East Coast. I did go to college. I went to... I graduated from high school, and that's one thing I did get. I got extra time for the test, the SAT, for taking the test to get into college in high school. And some of my college tests, I got extra time and things like that. So I did make it through college, but college was hard because I didn't have my mother there to help me. She helped me read my textbooks in high school, and it was harder in college not having her there. But I was getting better at reading by that time. But I still wasn't fast. It always took me so much longer. So basically, I ran away from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I became a ski bum. But I was very good with my hands, and I loved to cook and bake. And I ran a bakery. I started out just working in the bakery, and I ended up running it. So I did that for 4 years. But I knew I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I ended up going to a therapist to help me try to figure out what I wanted to do. And she suggested I did love kids. And so I went and volunteered in a school. And I have compassion for the kids that are struggling in the school. So I ended up becoming a teacher. I came back to the East Coast and got my master's in teaching. And I taught for 5 years, basically second grade, which I think is kind of interesting that I've spent so much time in second grade. But second grade, again, is that time where you're learning the phonics. And I really believe it helped still integrate it into my brain, the English language integrated more into my brain, and having to, reading out loud to the kids helped. And I think I was a very good second grade teacher, especially for the kids that were struggling.
Yes. Yeah. And a very interesting view, seeing it again from that side of the fence, so to speak, rather than as you did as a kid.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's really interesting, actually. You managed to get picked up early, but still, I guess, the limitations of just the era that you were in school in, with how they could help you out with just the Ort Gillingham, and that was about it. But did you find that you did any more training or help, or find any other methods for dyslexia as you walked through your life as you got older?
Trying to think. Well, I definitely read that book, The Dyslexic Advantage, when it first came out.
Yeah.
I love that book, and I listened to you. I know you interviewed one of the authors, and I was interested in listening to it again. So I read it when it first came out. And so that was the first time that I realized that there's some advantages, or that somebody said there's advantages. I think I did know. I mean, I know I'm creative and things like that, but I don't think I had the confidence in my creativity and things like that. So that book really helped me realize that my brain, that dyslexic people it's important to have them in society. And so that reading that book, and I read some, I think there's one, Overcoming Dyslexia. Sally, I can't remember her last name, but she's at Yale University. So basically, reading more books about dyslexia and understanding it, because there's been so much more research since I was little. So that helped. And being a teacher, I was interested in. I think I joined the Ort Gillingham Society, so I would read the different articles and things like that. So just educating myself helped put it in perspective. Yeah, and I think it definitely gave me the confidence when I did finally start to write the book that I wrote.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting, because obviously at 50 you went back and got your sort of degree in eating psychology. Now, would that be the first time you were back in education since leaving school? And if it was,
since my master's, it was probably since the time. Yes. Yeah.
So the world.
Yeah, I stayed home. I stayed home with my kids for about 10 years. Yeah, so I stayed home with my kids and raised them for 10 years. And I was a little worried. I have 2 children. I was worried that because dyslexia does run in the family. My father had it, but he didn't know it at the time. So because I had been an elementary school teacher, I did lots of rhyming with them, and I did lots of early reading to them, and supported them. A lot of work was coming out in the importance of early childhood education. So, because I had been a teacher, I knew how to support them, and neither of them actually Kate may have a teeny bit of dyslexia, or a teeny bit of, divergent brain, but my son Sam doesn't. So, I was at home for about 10 years, and then I went back and was a reading tutor for about 5 years. I told you I jump all over the place.
Yes.
And then I did the eating psychology. And then I was a mindful self-compassion teacher while I was, I've done a lot. And then my husband and I, in the later 50s, we left Massachusetts and moved to Vermont and decided to take a gap year.
Yes. I was going to come to that. But before we do, it's interesting when you were doing your psychology at sort of 50 odd. Now, that's a lot of difference from when you first got your education. Did you use any other sort of methods in that point? Because obviously you might have read the Dyslexic Advantage by that point. Anything you kind of pour into it in the decades that have passed since you last got your master's? Did you use more tools and stuff to help you through?
Yes. The classes were all recorded, so I could listen to them again and again.
Yeah.
And also by that time, finally, spell check was there. So writing papers, man, without spell check, boy. And I do remember being a teacher in the early 90s and having to write handwritten notes to parents, just even a short couple of sentences. Oh, struggling over. I had one of those, it was like a handheld spell checker that you could type out the words and it would give you the correct spelling. And I do remember using that. But, by the time I was doing the eating psychology classwork, I had a computer, which had spell check, being able to listen to the classes over again. And again, the way I take notes too is a little bit all over the place, but I think I learned that's okay. And I used arrows and, sort of a lot of not doodling, but arrows and more of a web, the way I would take notes. And that was okay. I didn't have to, I feel like in high school, I was taught you had to take notes, sort of like an outline. And I'm not good with outlines. I'm much more of a web visual person.
Yes. So you're doing sort of more like a mind map kind of thing, is that
yes,
kind of?
Yeah. Mind map, exactly.
Yeah, really, they're really useful.
yeah, they are.
Cool. So you said that, roll forward to your mid-50s, you and your husband decided you're going to take an adult gap year and did a lot of walking. Now, I assume you're a walker beforehand. That seems ambitious, but why the adult gap year, and why did you decide that walking 14,000 miles in Europe would be the thing you were going to do on it, rather than sitting in Spain drinking pina coladas, that is?
Well, the reason that we did it is that we had, again, left Massachusetts and moved up to Vermont. And it seemed like our kids had finished college and they were off. They had jobs themselves and we were empty nesters. Our parents were still okay and didn't need our help at that time. It seemed like the perfect time to go off. I had always wanted to either, walk the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, do some big adventure. But at the age of the late 50s, at that point, I didn't really want to camp anymore. So those trails, you need to camp. And both Jim and I have hiked. We backpacked, but never more than a week. We've taken week vacations, but we had never taken a long vacation. So we just kept asking people, what's a great adventure that you've been on? And we happened to run into a Frenchman who had traveled all over the world and for business and for adventure. And he talked about the GR5, the Grand Randonnée 5, which I had never heard of any of the Grand Randonnées, but they're in Europe. And there are many of them. There's not just 5. There's, there's lots. And I Googled GR5, and it says it starts in Hoek van Holland in the Netherlands, and you walk through the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and then across the all of France, eastern France, down to the Mediterranean. And that just sounded really exciting to me. And what I did learn in this whole process of getting ready for the trip was that I'm very good at I mean, I knew I was good at planning, but planning a 3-month trip, I was very good at picturing the whole thing and breaking it into pieces. And I read lots of blogs and other books. And I like to do my homework and be ready for whatever. Since we had never, walked more than a week, we wanted to know what we were getting ourselves into. And that's part of the planning for me for these walks now is almost as much fun as the actual walk.
Really?
Yeah.
So what goes into the planning of that? Because you said you're quite good at the planning, which immediately springs to mind. You like the mind maps, so maybe your dyslexic brain can visually plan it. But for a long walk like that isn't something you just think, well, I'll pack a bag and a good pair of trainers and go for it. So what does actually have to go into the planning of these kind of things?
Again, reading a bunch of different books, and some of the guidebooks, tell you, you need to go from village to village. Well, do we want to walk, 15 kilometers, or, do we want to walk 20 kilometers that day? And so making those decisions, we didn't know exactly how fast we walked, but we could figure it out. So it was a lot of math, actually. We want to go from here to here to here to here. And but if we only want to walk 20 kilometers this day, but the next town really is 30 kilometers. So what are we going to do about that? And planning it out and then having to make all the different reservations. We didn't plan we made reservations in the beginning. We started in late April. So we just made reservation 2 or 3 days out. But as it got towards summer, once we got to the Alps, we had to do it almost 2 and 3 weeks out. Which, again, building Jim, my husband, we're a good pair because he's much more detailed than I am. And I call him the spreadsheet, and I'm the web, I'm the mind web.
Okay, yeah.
So we work well together. Sometimes we butt heads, but and he's more technology. I mean, I can definitely do all the, Gaia we use Gaia as the GPS. So it's mapping to being able to, visualize the whole map and, see where we're going to be going. And it's kind of like a fun puzzle.
Yeah. And what physical preparation would you have to do for that? Like to get, because that's quite a toll on the body doing that kind of mileage in a year, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Again, living just having moved to Vermont, there's a lot of dirt roads, and I was training and basically walking long distances on the dirt roads with my pack. And I, was trying to build up. I don't think I ever walked more than 6 hours, but, started out, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, just building up over the weeks. And we actually decided, we kind of broke the rules of walking, and we biked the first week because it's flat. And Jim is pretty hardcore. He likes to keep moving along. And I was a little worried he'd get bored with the flat walking. So we ended up biking the first week, and then we walked the rest of the time.
It all comes out now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you obviously complete these walks. It's a big adventure. At what point during it did the spark come that you were going to write a book about it?
So it actually wasn't till I got home. When I travel, I always write sort of a paragraph about the day. And so I had kept a journal. Jim keeps a journal, but his is more we did this. He writes exactly how many kilometers we did, and we walked from this to this, and we saw this and this. And I usually write about my emotions and feelings. It really wasn't until we got home, and we had an amazing time on this trip. Walking with your spouse, someone I'd been married to for a long time. I don't know. We sort of reconnected after raising our kids, and we talked a lot, but we also didn't talk a lot. We also had a lot of time to just think and meditate as we walked. And the trip just kind of flowed. We met so many interesting people. We saw so many interesting things and learned so much. When I came home, it was like, why don't people in the rest of the U.S. know about the GR5 and know about these long distance walks? And being in Europe with the French, who love to walk and feel like it's part of their heritage to walk, I just wanted to share the love of walking. And so I started writing some of the stories that touched my heart. And I kept writing and kept writing. And I have a friend who's been an editor and in like New York City, and she read my beginning stories, and she goes, this is really great. You got a ways to go, but there's some great stories in here. She called it it's the soil to build the garden. And I was like, I thought it was all done. So I actually ended up taking some online writing classes. I read as many memoirs as I could read to understand the structure of a memoir. And again, my dyslexic brain I could visualize what the whole story would look like. And I also learned, a good memoir, you have flashbacks to important parts of your life. And for me, I do talk about dyslexia in the book because, struggling with the French language brings up, some of that shame of struggling in the English language, and having a second language to me was always very hard. And it was very hard for me. Jim could pick up the French much more easily, and it was a struggle for me. So I talk about, struggling with dyslexia. So again, I could imagine the whole book, and I could figure out where I wanted to put these flashbacks of the important parts of my life. And it was a whole learning process. And I feel like I definitely had to use patience, which hasn't always been a strong point for me. But I got better at patience. So I guess I would say to other dyslexics too, who have struggled, that you've got a long life. And I feel like, finally I've become a good writer and I'm a good reader. And it just has taken a lot longer than maybe everybody else, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. And it's interesting. Is it the first book you've written, or you done anything else before?
No, that was the first book. I had written blogs for my business. Short blogs and articles about the struggles with eating and things like that. But I had never written a whole book. No, not at all.
And did you find, reflecting back on things like you sort of saying struggles with dyslexia and the struggles with eating, that as you were doing the flashbacks during the sort of this memoir of your trip, did you learn anything more that you didn't learn as you were walking along?
That's a good question. I think, again, I learned, I learned patience and stamina, but it's not walking stamina, but working the words. On the back of my door of my study, whenever I was reading and I found an interesting word, I would just write it down. And, there's thousands of words in the English language, but I kind of trusted my intuition and maybe my dyslexic brain that I didn't know why that word was important and that I might use it. And so I just had a list of, I don't know, I never knew, I never counted them up, but I would, write down these words and then I'd go back when I was struggling with a sentence and I'd say, I think there's that word's back on my list. And I would, fit it into the sentence. So, when I was in high school, having to rewrite papers was like, it was like I wrote it the first time. Well, you want me to write it again? It was such a struggle. Yes. But here I understood the long-term goal of having the writing being the best it can be. And I do believe because of all the listening to stories and I do love to read now. Yeah. I do know what good language is. And I also believe that, some people have said my book is, sort of very stark prose. And I think that's true. It's not flowery because I can say, I learned to say things in a small amount of, a small amount of time or a small sentence. And I don't need overly flowery description. I wouldn't say it's overly flowery descriptive. And it's probably not super complex sentences, but I did get better at having more interesting sentences because you can't, having something that's very simple sentences all the way through is not the most interesting to read.
No, it's not. So if somebody was perusing a bookstore and they saw your book and they picked it up, what are they expecting? What would you expect they get out of giving your book a read? What sort of journey are you taking them on? Is it you mentioned flashbacks. It's obviously about your walk through Europe, but what kind of read is it? Is it a sort of a dialogue of your thoughts or more of a just what it's like to be walking in these kind of areas? How would you describe it, I suppose, on the side of an A4 bit of paper, I think is what I'm trying to ask.
I hope it's a weaving of the beauty that we saw because we definitely saw beauty, but also it's the emotions that I was feeling from that beauty. Mm-hmm. And the calm, when you walk, what I learned is when you walk, you really get into a steady rhythm. And it calms your brain down. And having dyslexia, so much of our time as a child was in a little bit of stress because, and you weren't calm. What is it? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I always get them confused, but there's different states in your brain where I think when you're in a calm environment, you think more clearly. So again, let's get back to the question. The question was what I hope I'm weaving together, the beauty of the walk and, my reflections on life, that I inspire people to get out and walk themselves, if that makes sense, and find their own beauty and find their own calm. Our life these days, we don't live very calm lives. And that's why it was an amazing gap year to be able to, get up and walk and be in nature. We've also learned that being in nature is so important to our brains and our nervous system. And I feel lucky and privileged to have been able to do that. And so I hope when you're reading the book, you either get inspired to walk or just even reading, hopefully, calms your nervous system. It's not there's not any cancer, there's not any hardcore, there's struggle in the dyslexia part, but other than that, there's a little bit of struggle between Jim and I too, just to make it interesting because spicy, that's part of life.
It is, yes.
As a couple.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned obviously if a person picks it up and they're dyslexic and see that you talk about dyslexia in it, What sort of, without spoiling the book, obviously, what sort of takeaways do you think somebody with dyslexia would take from it when they read about your struggles with dyslexia and framed as a flashback through this walk that you were doing?
Well, that you're not alone, and that those feelings, even though I, got the help that I needed, I still struggled with the shame. And when we share our shame, we shine light on it. That actually helped me a lot. And so I'm hoping, again, I talk about, just sort of pretending to read and having, because I was so worried that my friends would think I was stupid. And so if another dyslexic person is feeling these feelings of shame, that they will understand that they're not alone. So I do focus a fair amount on the emotions related to dyslexia. And I also talk about mindful self-compassion and giving myself compassion. And, now I think about it, maybe we should be, I know they're teaching more meditation and things like that in schools, but really we need to be teaching self-compassion to kids, because even if you don't have dyslexia, there's something else that, all kids struggle with different things. And we need to learn that, we're not alone, and that part of being human is suffering. So I hope they feel like they're not alone. And I have, my book is in audio forms too. So if if you'd like to listen to it, I think that, I guess I hope I hope you see that you have some, that you can find your own strengths and your superpowers. Because I do talk about the superpower of being able to plan a trip and things like that. The other thing is, because of the dyslexia, I never would have learned about self-compassion, mindful self-compassion, if I hadn't been dyslexic. So you have to learn to be able to turn the hard parts of life into a silver, what's the silver lining?
Yes. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. So a good read for a dyslexic person as well. Now, every guest that comes on this podcast gets 3 rapid-fire questions from me. They don't necessarily need rapid-fire answers from yourself. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
Well, I guess I was told that I was stupid, and that's just not true.
No.
And in fact, dyslexic people are definitely are just so important. And that I also had the belief, and I don't know if somebody certainly told that, dyslexic people can't make it through school, and that's not true at all either. And I'm just, very happy that there's so many different support systems these days. So yeah, it's definitely a mind shift to, if you have ever been told that you're stupid or that, that you won't make it, you will. It may take you longer, or you will find a different path than everybody else. And that's okay too. That makes you stronger too.
Yes.
I think I have, I'm willing to take risks, and I'm willing to go off and walk 1,400 miles because I've failed in so many other times in my life that I'm not afraid to fail.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And rapid fire question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question too. Basically, that your brain is wired a little bit differently than I don't know what the exact the normal person, but I don't like saying that. But a dyslexic's brain is wired differently, and things, many traditional skills, for example, reading, take longer to learn. But when you have the support, you can learn. But there are these amazing superpowers, and they're all quite different. And you need to find what your superpower is and capitalize on it. Find the jobs that will help you. And nowadays, too, I think it's important to explain at work that your brain is different and things like that. And that's a whole, I don't think when I was a teacher, I didn't tell anyone I had dyslexia because I don't know what would have happened back then. But nowadays, I think I would tell.
Yeah. Disclosing it can be really, really empowering and helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. And the final question is rapid fire set. And seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
Listening to books, listening to stories, find the avenue that you learn best. Like I definitely learn best through auditory, listening to stories and using notes to write things down. And so, find the avenue that works best for you. And for me, that would be, audiobooks or nowadays podcasts are so wonderful for different ways to learn. And just, chatting with someone instead of, email is still, and even texting sometimes is a little bit hard for me to get my point across. Sometimes it's easier to just pick up the phone and talk. I don't know. Do you find that too?
Yeah. Sometimes I do look at email like, I've got to reply to this at some point. So,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that just leaves me to thank you for taking the time to come on the show this evening and to ask you if there's anything else you'd like to add and where can people find you and your book?
You can find my book anywhere where you buy books. You may have to ask them to order it if you want it if you want it in, hardcover or paperback. It's in paperback. But there's an ebook, on Kindle or wherever you get your ebooks, and audiobooks wherever you get your audiobook. And my website is Kathy with a K, Elkind.com. And if you're interested in any of the long walks, I have some short videos about the walks here in the US. I have a few. I do book events and things like that. And if anyone ever wants me to come talk to them, I'm happy to.
Okay, cool. Well, head over there if you want to get hold of Kathy. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show this evening.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.